This story is titled, My Adoptive Parents Decided to Sell My Personal House Left by My Biological Parents. They called police on me, and I was forcibly evicted from my own home. Now federal authorities are handling this case. Hey Reddit, my name is Jason, and I'm 26 years old. I own what I'd consider a decent real estate portfolio. And just yesterday I had to call the police on my own father for breaking into one of my properties. If someone had told me this story 6 years ago, I would have laughed right in their face. But here we are. And honestly, I'm not even mad anymore. I'm actually impressed by the sheer audacity of what he tried to pull. Let me back up and explain how we got to this point, because it's been a long journey. When I was 16 years old, my mother passed away. It was devastating, and I was still trying to process the grief when my dad wasted absolutely no time in marrying this overbearing woman named Victoria. She was 45 at the time, and from day one she tried way too hard to replace my mom in our household. After enduring 4 months of watching her throw away my mother's belongings and redecorate my room without even asking for my permission, I made the decision to move in with my grandfather Frank. Frank was my dad's father, a retired judge who had this massive house with something like 6 bedrooms. When I approached him about the situation, he said yes immediately to letting me move in. Looking back now, it was the best decision I ever made. My grandfather was incredibly cool about the whole arrangement. He gave me plenty of space to be a teenager, but he was always there whenever I wanted to talk about anything. More importantly, he taught me valuable lessons about money management, property ownership, and legal matters. Those lessons would end up saving my ass in ways I never could have imagined at the time. When Grandpa Frank died suddenly when I was 18, he left me everything in his will. This included his house, 3 rental properties, and enough cash to get started building my own future. The inheritance was substantial and completely changed the trajectory of my life. My dad, on the other hand, got absolutely nothing from the will. When he found out, he completely lost his mind. He started yelling and screaming about how the property should rightfully go to him since he was Grandpa's biological son. But my grandfather's will was absolutely bulletproof legally. He had even made a video recording explaining exactly why he made this decision, stating clearly that he trusted me to be responsible with the inheritance, unlike my father. Here's where the situation gets really weird. Instead of me moving back in with my dad and Victoria after inheriting the house, they decided they were going to move into my house instead. Their reasoning was that their current place was too small, and since I now had this big house, it just made sense for them to live there. Keep in mind I was still only 18 years old at the time, so I didn't really feel like I had much choice in the matter. However, I wasn't completely powerless. I set some firm ground rules from the beginning. They absolutely could not go into my bedroom or my grandfather's office under any circumstances. Those rooms contained personal belongings and important legal papers that I needed to protect. I made this boundary crystal clear from day one. When I turned 19, I left for college out of state. During this time, I continued to let them live in the house completely rent-free. I only came back for holidays and some weekends throughout the school year. Throughout this entire period, I was the one paying all the property taxes, maintenance costs, repairs, and every other expense associated with the house. I never asked them to contribute even a single penny toward any of these costs. My thinking at the time was that they were at least keeping an eye on the place for me while I was away at school. Instead of blowing through my grandfather's money like a stupid teenager might do, I made the smart decision to use the rental income from the properties I'd inherited to purchase additional real estate. By the time I graduated college at 23, I owned 7 rental units total. After finishing my degree, I got a job back in the same city working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm. I found myself a decent apartment about 25 minutes away from the inherited house and kept steadily building my property portfolio. By the time I reached 26, I had acquired 10 properties that were generating serious monthly income. This living arrangement with my dad and stepmother worked out perfectly for 7 full years. They got completely free housing in a beautiful home, and I got the peace of mind that came with knowing someone was watching over my first and most important property. Everyone seemed happy with the situation, and I thought this could continue indefinitely. That all changed last month when everything went straight to hell. My dad called me up and dropped this absolute bombshell on me. You need to clean out your room this weekend. We're giving it to Victoria's daughter, Lily. I was standing in one of my rental properties at the time, conducting a routine inspection when this man had the audacity to give me orders about my own house. I stopped dead in my tracks, completely stunned by what I was hearing. Who the hell is Lily? I asked him. I had never even heard this name mentioned before in all the years Victoria had been part of our family. My dad then explained. She's Victoria's daughter from her first marriage. She's fighting for custody of her kids and needs stable housing. Your room is the biggest one in the house. I was completely confused by this revelation. Victoria had never once mentioned that she had a daughter during all these years we'd known each other. And now, out of absolutely nowhere, this woman had suddenly appeared in our lives, and they wanted her to live in my house. After 7 years of providing them with completely free housing, they were now demanding that I give away my personal bedroom to some complete stranger. But as I thought about it more, things started making sense in a disturbing way. This explained why Victoria had treated me like absolute garbage when I was 16 years old. This woman had a daughter that she had completely abandoned and never talked about for 7 entire years. She couldn't even be bothered to mention this girl's existence, let alone maintain any kind of relationship with her own child. No wonder she had no problem throwing away my mother's belongings and trying to erase me from my own house back then. She had already done the exact same thing to her own daughter first. "Are you completely insane?" I responded. "You're guests in my house. You don't get to make decisions about who lives here." That's when my dad's mask came off completely. He started screaming at me about family obligations, how I was being selfish, how Lily really needed this help, and how I was cruel for refusing to help someone in need. Here I was, standing in some random rental property I owned, listening to my father have a complete meltdown because I wouldn't give my bedroom to a woman I had never even met in my life. The manipulation was so obvious it was almost insulting to my intelligence. He was trying to make me the bad guy for protecting my own personal space, while painting himself as the caring family man who was just trying to help someone in dire need. It was classic guilt trip bullshit, and I could see right through it. "Don't touch my room or Grandpa's office," I said clearly, keeping my voice level even though my hands were shaking with anger. "Touch either one and I'll evict you immediately." My dad went absolutely nuclear at this threat. "You can't evict family," he screamed. "We've been living here for 7 years. We have rights." "You have the right to find your own place," I replied calmly. "Don't test me on this." Then he dropped the real bombshell that explained everything. They had sold their old house years ago to pay off debt. They literally had nowhere else to go if I kicked them out. I was absolutely livid when I heard this. "Sounds like you should have thought about that before trying to give away my bedroom," I told him, and then hung up the phone. I sat in my car for 15 minutes after that phone call, my hands still shaking from the anger and adrenaline. Part of me couldn't believe that our relationship had deteriorated to this point. The other part of my brain was already planning my next move and thinking through the legal implications of what I might need to do. That night, I barely slept. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing, but the guilt was absolutely eating at me. These weren't complete strangers I was dealing with. This was my dad, the same guy who had taught me to ride a bike and came to my basketball games when I was a kid. Was I really about to make my own father homeless over a bedroom dispute? I kept thinking about what people would say when word got out. Family friends, relatives, everyone who would inevitably ask, "How could you kick out your own dad?" The story would spread through our social circles, and I'd be painted as the ungrateful son who chose money over family. The judgment and criticism felt overwhelming even before it happened. But then I forced myself to remember finding Victoria going through my phone at 3 a.m. when I was 16 years old. I remembered my dad standing there like a statue while she threw away my mother's jewelry without a second thought. I remembered 7 years of paying every single bill while they lived completely free and acted like they owned the place. And on top of all that, I had never even met this Lily person before. She was absolutely nothing to me. Not family, just some random woman that Victoria had abandoned for years and now suddenly wanted to help. Why the hell would I put a complete stranger in my house for someone who couldn't even be bothered to mention her own daughter's existence for 7 years? At that point, I was completely done being a pushover. That same night, Uncle Trevor called me out of nowhere. He's my dad's brother, and I hadn't talked to him in years because of some business falling out they'd had. "Hey kiddo, heard you're having some family drama," he said. "Maybe you should reconsider this eviction thing. Family's supposed to stick together, right?" I could smell the setup through the phone. Uncle Trevor had never called me just to chat, and he'd never cared about family drama before. My dad had obviously gotten to him first, probably crying about his cruel son who was about to make him homeless, and painting himself as the victim in all of this. "I'll think about it," I lied, because I wanted to see what other moves they would try to pull. Trevor seemed satisfied with my response. Good. Your dad's been through a lot lately. This custody thing with Lily is really important," he said before hanging up. Immediately after that call, I called my lawyer. We agreed to go to the house early the next morning to serve them with official eviction papers. I wanted everything done legally and by the book, with no surprises and no room for them to claim I hadn't followed proper procedures. The next morning, I drove over to the house with my lawyer to serve the proper eviction papers. I was actually nervous as hell. My palms were sweating, and I kept rehearsing what I would say when I had to look my dad in the face. I pulled into the driveway of my own house and walked up to my own front door. I put my key in the lock, and it didn't work. For a second, I thought I had grabbed the wrong key by mistake. Then reality hit me like a freight train. These absolute morons had changed the locks on my house without telling me. After everything I had done for them over 7 years, they were literally locking me out of my own property. I pounded on the door until my dad finally answered, but he wouldn't actually open it. Instead, he just talked through the wood like some paranoid criminal hiding from the authorities. "I'm not letting you in until you change your mind about Lily," he said from behind the locked door. That's when every single doubt I'd had about this situation completely disappeared. This had absolutely nothing to do with some custody case or helping family members in need. They wanted control, especially my dad. He actually thought he could lock me out of my own house and force me to cave to his demands. And there I was, standing outside with a lawyer beside me, while my own father was refusing to let me into my own property. The cold anger was back, but now it was mixed with complete clarity about what needed to happen next. "You illegally changed locks on property you don't own," I said, my voice deadly calm. "And you're refusing to let the actual owner inside. You just committed about 4 different crimes. Genius." "This is my home too. I have rights," he screamed from behind the door like a maniac. "Your rights ended the second you locked me out of my own house," I replied. "Hope it was worth it." I called the police immediately. My lawyer was already pulling up property records on her phone, building our case and gathering all the documentation we would need. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was ready for war. When the responding officer arrived, he listened carefully while my lawyer showed him all the property records, inheritance documents, and everything else proving that I was the legal owner of the house. The police officer gave my dad a very simple choice: open the door and let me in, or get arrested for criminal trespassing on top of everything else he had already done. My dad finally opened up the door, looking like he had aged 15 years overnight. Victoria was crying hysterically in the background, while this random woman Lily sat in the corner looking uncomfortable as hell about the entire situation. The officer calmly explained that my dad was being evicted for changing locks and refusing the property owner access to his own home. My dad tried every excuse in the book. They had nowhere to go. They had lived there for 7 years. He claimed that Grandpa had verbally promised him the house before he died. "Do you have any documentation of this verbal promise?" the officer asked. There was dead silence from my dad. I almost felt bad watching him realize how incredibly weak his legal position actually was. "Any written agreement about your tenancy here?" the officer continued. More silence from my dad. "Any proof you've been paying rent or contributing to property ownership?" My dad was scrambling now. "I've been maintaining the property," he said desperately. "I fixed the back door last year." "With your own money or money provided by the property owner?" the officer asked. That's when the truth came out. I had been paying for every single repair, every improvement, and every single expense for 7 years. My dad had been living completely free while I built a property empire around him. Watching my dad try to explain the situation to the police officer was absolutely pathetic. He kept insisting that he had rights as a long-term resident, and that this was family business that didn't need police involvement. The officer just stared at him like he was speaking complete gibberish. "Who changed the locks?" the cop asked directly. My dad claimed he didn't remember the company name, obviously lying through his teeth. I could see him calculating whether admitting to it would make things worse for him legally. The officer made some phone calls and managed to track down the locksmith within an hour. This sketchy operation had done the work without verifying ownership or getting proper documentation from my dad. When the locksmith found out over the phone that he'd been hired to lock out the actual property owner, you could hear him panicking about his license. The guy was clearly freaking out about the legal ramifications of what he'd unknowingly participated in. I pressed charges against both my dad and the locksmith. My dad got charged for illegal tampering and preventing property owner access, while the locksmith got charged for failure to verify ownership before changing locks. The officer was writing up all the reports while I stood there watching my relationship with my father officially come to an end. Part of me felt physically sick about what was happening, but I also felt genuinely relieved that all the games and manipulation were finally over. While my dad and Victoria were packing up their belongings, I got a closer look at this Lily character who had supposedly caused all this drama. She was in her mid-30s with nervous energy, constantly checking her phone like she was expecting bad news at any moment. Nothing about her demeanor screamed, mother fighting for custody of her children. I decided to test their story directly. "So what's the timeline on getting your kids back?" I asked her casually. She looked over at Victoria nervously, then back at me. "It's complicated," she said vaguely. "The court process takes time." That was red flag number one. Vague answers when a real mother would have specific dates, court schedules, and detailed timelines burned into her memory from stress and anticipation. I kept pushing for more information. "How many kids?" I asked. Another nervous glance at Victoria before answering. "Just one, a daughter," she said. "How old?" I pressed. There was a long pause before she answered. "She's 8 now." The whole interaction felt completely wrong to me. A mother who was genuinely fighting for custody would be talking non-stop about her kid, showing pictures on her phone, explaining every detail of the legal situation with passion and urgency. This woman was giving me bare minimum answers like she was making up the story on the spot. Then, Victoria stopped packing her stuff and absolutely snapped at me. "Oh, give me a break," she barked, stepping between us like she owned the place. "You're really going to interrogate her like she's on trial? After everything we've been through?" She pointed right at me, her voice rising with each word. "You're a disgusting, selfish little brat with a bank account. Your mother would roll in her grave if she saw what you've become. Hoarding rooms and money while your father's on the street and your stepsister is fighting for her kid. You think this house makes you powerful? It just makes you heartless." I didn't respond, but she kept going, getting louder and more unhinged. "You didn't build this. Frank did. Your precious grandpa. And you're too cowardly to admit that without him you'd be nothing, just a spoiled kid playing landlord." Before I could even open my mouth to respond, the cop near the door raised his hand firmly. "Ma'am, that's enough," he said with authority. "This isn't your house and you're one more outburst away from being removed for obstruction. I suggest you stop talking." Victoria immediately clamped her mouth shut, but the look she gave me could have melted steel. I didn't flinch or react at all, but I made a mental note to dig deeper into Lily's story later because absolutely nothing was adding up. Right now, though, the only goal was getting them out of my house for good. That first night after they moved out, I walked through my house in complete silence. After 7 years of having other people living there, suddenly it was just mine again. It should have felt good, but instead, I felt this hollow emptiness settling over me. When I went into my room, I discovered that they had already started moving my stuff out in preparation for Lily. My clothes were stuffed into garbage bags, and my desk had been moved to make room for a bed they had apparently ordered for her. They had been so confident that I would eventually cave to their demands that they had already started giving away my personal space. And just like that, any lingering doubt I had about my decisions disappeared completely. These people had been planning to steamroll me regardless of what I said or how I felt about it. The lock change wasn't just a desperate move. It was step one of a calculated plan to take over my house entirely. Meanwhile, the locksmith who had changed my locks without proper verification got absolutely destroyed by the licensing board. It turns out this wasn't his first time doing shady work without verifying ownership. His license got suspended for 8 months. He had to pay a massive fine, and his business reputation was completely ruined. When the local news picked up the story about the case, the guy actually called me begging to drop the charges. His voice was shaking as he talked about his kids and his mortgage, claiming that this legal action would destroy his livelihood. I felt bad for about 15 seconds, then I remembered that professional locksmiths are supposed to verify ownership before changing locks on any property. This is absolutely basic stuff in their industry. If you're going to change locks, the very first thing you do is make sure the person hiring you actually owns the property. It's a pretty simple concept, and ignorance isn't an excuse for not following basic professional standards. I told him, "Maybe next time you'll do your job properly." The harsh reality was that his sloppy work had enabled my father to lock me out of my own house. If I let it slide, what message did that send to other contractors who might cut corners in the future? There had to be consequences for this kind of negligence. My dad got charged with criminal mischief for the lock situation, plus trespassing for refusing to let me access my own property. During his court appearance, he showed absolutely zero remorse for what he had done. He kept insisting that he had rights to his son's property, like being related to me somehow gave him legal ownership. The judge was not having any of it. "Mr. Johnson, you illegally locked your son out of his own property, then broke into another property he owned," the judge said sternly. "Your son didn't steal anything from you. He inherited property legally, and you committed crimes trying to take it from him. My dad actually stood up during sentencing and gave this whole dramatic speech about ungrateful children and family loyalty. He claimed that I was stealing his inheritance and turning my back on family by enforcing basic property rights. Watching him make that speech was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my entire life. The man who had raised me was standing in court, blaming me for his own criminal behavior and refusing to take any responsibility for his actions. Part of me wanted to stand up and say, "Dad, just stop talking. You're making it worse for yourself." But I stayed quiet. I let him talk and twist the situation however he wanted. In the end, he dug his own grave with that speech. He got 10 months total, 6 for breaking and entering, and another 4 for tampering with the locks. It wasn't exactly a moment I wanted to celebrate, but it was satisfying in its own way to see the legal system work properly. While my dad was busy dealing with court dates and legal headaches, things took another weird turn that I never saw coming. About a month after the eviction, my phone rings and it's Uncle Trevor. The man sounds like he's in full-blown panic mode. No small talk, no pleasantries, just jumps straight into his request. He needs to sell his house immediately and won't say why, just asks if I'm interested in buying it. Now here's the part that Trevor didn't know, and this is where the story gets really good. The house he was trying to offload was actually my great-grandparents' old place, the one that Grandpa Frank had grown up in as a child. Grandpa had handed it down to Trevor years ago, but he had later told me privately that he regretted that decision. He said Trevor had let the property fall apart and didn't take care of it like he should have. Grandpa had even told me that if I ever got the chance to get that house back into the family, I should take it. He said it belonged with someone who would actually respect the family history and maintain it properly. And Trevor, he had absolutely no idea who he was calling. In his mind, I was still just that college kid who had lucked out with one inheritance. He didn't know that I had built a legitimate real estate empire while he wasn't paying attention to my business activities. I offered him 45% of market value, knowing he was desperate and had limited options. He said it was too low, but I could hear the panic in his voice when he tried to negotiate. "Same offer, but all cash," I countered. "Close next week, and I'll cover all legal fees and moving costs." The desperation won out over his pride, and he took the deal. I mean, business is business, right? If Trevor was desperate enough to sell that fast without shopping around for better offers, that was his problem to solve, not mine. After Trevor signed the house over and took off with the cash, I figured that was the end of our interaction. Quick sale, no questions asked, everyone moves on with their lives. But about a week later, I got a call from an old neighbor who lived near Trevor's former place. She was just chatting with me about the house sale, and then casually dropped this bombshell. "Funny, I thought your dad was buying it. That's what he told everyone in the neighborhood." Wait, what? That little comment sent me down a rabbit hole of investigation. I started putting pieces together and made a couple of quiet calls to mutual acquaintances. Yeah, it turns out that Trevor had originally been planning to sell the house to my dad. They had been talking for weeks about the arrangement, and my dad had been desperately scraping together whatever money he could find before he got himself arrested, thinking he would slide right back into his childhood home like nothing had ever happened. Let me clarify the timeline here, because it's important. My dad didn't go to jail immediately after the first arrest. He was booked, denied bail initially, and held in county jail for weeks while the court sorted everything out. But before his formal sentencing came down, he managed to scrape together bail money through Trevor, who later sold him out. That's how he got out long enough to try and buy Trevor's place from him. When Trevor told him your son bought it instead, my dad apparently assumed that I had done it for him, like it was some kind of peace offering. This man, who I had just evicted from my property, fully believed that he was automatically entitled to live in any property I owned, simply because he was my father. Being related to me somehow equaled lifetime access to free real estate in his mind. Without even realizing it, I had completely blown up his plan B. The house he was banking on as his safety net was gone, snapped up by the one person he never saw coming, me. But here's the thing. He had used the last of his scraped-together money to post bail, money that was supposed to go toward buying that house from Trevor. So now he was out of jail, broke, and apparently still thinking there was some way to get what he wanted. 4 days after closing on the house, I get a notification ping from the security system I had installed to keep tabs on the contractors doing renovations. I check the live feed from my office, expecting to see drywall guys or electricians working on the project. Nope. Instead, I'm watching my 52-year-old father full-on crawling through a broken window like some bargain bin cat burglar. This wasn't subtle, and it definitely wasn't smart, just pure desperation in action. Once he got inside, he started wandering around like he owned the place, opening drawers, checking closets, pacing around like he was planning where the couch would go in his new living room. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there watching this whole thing unfold on my phone, wondering if I should be angry or just impressed at the sheer delusion of what I was witnessing. I honestly don't know what he was thinking at that moment. He was literally breaking into property that I owned while he was already facing criminal charges for the last time he had messed with my property. Some people really never learn from their mistakes, I guess. I called the police immediately, but part of me felt physically sick about having to do it again. How had we gotten to this point in our relationship? When the cops found my dad inside the house and he tried to explain that, "This is my family's house, and my son bought it for me," I could see them trying not to laugh at his explanation. The officers asked him for documentation proving that he lived there or had permission to be there. My dad had absolutely nothing. No job, no money, no plan, just desperation and entitlement. When the cops told him that the house he had just broken into was legally mine, you could practically hear his brain rebooting in real time. He just froze completely. He stood there like someone had yanked the electrical cord out of his mental wall socket. This wasn't some misunderstanding or miscommunication. He had already pulled the illegal lock change stunt just a couple of months earlier. So when they booked him this time, the judge took one look at his file and said, "Nope, no bail this time. 2 similar stunts in 3 months." That was enough for the court to decide that he was either too reckless to be trusted on the streets or just straight up dangerous to me and my property. Maybe both assessments were accurate. While he sat in county jail waiting for his next hearing, I finally had the breathing room to look into something that had been bugging me since the whole Trevor situation went down. The rushed sale, the panicked phone call, the complete lack of explanation for why he needed to sell so quickly. None of it sat right with me. So I started digging deeper into the situation. I made a few quiet calls and reached out to people who ran in Trevor's social and business orbit. I contacted old business associates, mutual acquaintances from the local investor scene, anyone who might have insight into what had been going on with him recently. It took a bit of time and detective work, but I finally pieced together the whole story. Turns out Uncle Trevor had been in way over his head financially. He had borrowed big money, like 6-figure big, from a couple of shady business partners for some real estate flip project that had flopped spectacularly. This wasn't just a bad deal or poor market timing. It was a full-on financial faceplant, the kind that leaves scorched earth behind and destroys relationships. When the cash dried up and he couldn't pay back the loans he had taken, these guys didn't just send polite emails or formal letters. They came knocking with legal threats and serious pressure to liquidate his assets immediately. We're talking about real heat and genuine consequences for his financial irresponsibility. Uncle Trevor, being the coward that he is, obviously panicked when the pressure started mounting. Instead of owning his mess and dealing with the consequences like an adult, he started quietly offloading everything he could get his hands on. He was selling off furniture, draining his investment accounts, even liquidating personal belongings, all under the radar. It was like watching someone deliberately set their own life on fire, just so the flames wouldn't have a chance to touch anyone else around them. And yeah, you can imagine how proud I am of my uncle right now. My offer on the house, that was his escape pod. He just needed one last lump sum of cash to disappear from the situation entirely. I wouldn't be surprised if the guy had his bags packed the morning we closed on the deal. Look, I actually felt a little used when I found all this out. No one likes being treated like a chess piece in someone else's game. But let's be real here. I still walked away with that property for 45% under market value. I wasn't exactly crying myself to sleep over the transaction. Trevor might have pulled a fast one on me by not explaining his desperation, but he only needed to sell in the first place because he had completely tanked his own life through poor decisions. That part wasn't on me at all. And just to be clear, I didn't actively lie for him or help cover his tracks. But I may have casually mentioned to a few mutual acquaintances what direction he seemed to be heading when he left town. If you're going to burn your bridges with dangerous business partners and then try to ghost your way out of the consequences, don't expect family members to help hide the smoke. That's not how I operate in business or personal relationships. After all that drama, I figured I'd seen the last of the chaos for a while. I just wanted to focus on stabilizing the new property, tightening up leases on my other rentals, and getting back to the business of building my portfolio. But life doesn't work like that, does it? It never just hands you one mess at a time to deal with. While I was still juggling the legal cleanup from my dad's latest stunt and managing the Trevor House situation, the past came crawling out from a totally different direction and hit me harder than I expected. During my dad's court proceedings, I finally got the real truth about Lily from an unexpected source. Victoria approached me outside the courthouse looking like absolute hell. Desperate, exhausted, and completely defeated. "Please," she said, grabbing my arm with shaky hands. "Can we talk? There's stuff you don't know about Lily." We sat in my car while Victoria completely fell apart in front of me. Turns out the whole custody battle story was complete fiction from start to finish. Lily didn't have any kids to fight for in court. She had lost custody of her one daughter years ago for neglect and substance abuse issues. The court case wasn't about getting custody back. It was about the state trying to permanently terminate her parental rights. Lily was fighting just to keep even supervised visitation rights, not to get her daughter back and create a stable home. Victoria had made up the entire sob story to manipulate me into giving Lily free housing. They figured that if I thought some poor mother was fighting to reunite with her children, I'd be more likely to open my heart and my home to help out. It was classic emotional manipulation, using fake kids as props to pull at my heartstrings. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just that they had lied to me. It was that they had used the idea of a mother losing her children to manipulate me. That's some genuinely sociopathic level scheming right there. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I asked Victoria. "Maybe I would have helped if you'd been honest with me from the beginning." Victoria just stared at her hands and said quietly, "Would you have really?" Honestly, probably not. But at least I would have respected them for being straight with me instead of playing elaborate manipulation games. Victoria then begged me to let them move into one of my rental properties once my dad gets out of jail. She promised they would pay rent this time, be model tenants, and never cause problems again. I told her that all my units had paying tenants with signed leases, which was a complete lie. She then asked if I could help them financially with a deposit somewhere else. I walked away without saying another word to her. Word of my dad's legal troubles spread through our extended family like wildfire. Suddenly, I'm getting phone calls from relatives I barely knew, all with strong opinions about how I had destroyed the family and abandoned my father in his time of need. There's Aunt Patricia, who I hadn't talked to since I was 13 years old, calling to lecture me about forgiveness and Christian values. "Family forgives, honey," she said in that condescending tone. "This is what Satan wants. Families torn apart by pride and money." According to her twisted logic, I was somehow doing the devil's work by enforcing basic property rights. Then there's Uncle Brian, my dad's cousin, who wanted to know if I was really going to let family end up homeless over some silly property dispute. Like 7 years of completely free housing was just a silly misunderstanding that could be laughed off. Every single conversation followed the exact same script. I was painted as the bad guy for enforcing reasonable boundaries. My dad was portrayed as the victim of unfortunate circumstances beyond his control. And I should fix everything by giving him money or housing, because that's what family does for each other. The manipulation was so obvious it was actually insulting to my intelligence. Not one of these people offered to help my dad themselves. Not one of them opened their own homes or checkbooks to solve his housing problem. They just wanted me to sacrifice my property and income to solve a problem that my dad had created through his own poor choices. "Why don't you let him stay with you?" I asked Uncle Brian directly. "Well, we don't have the space," he replied without missing a beat. "I see. So I should house him for free, but you can't because you don't have space." "Got it," I said, before hanging up. My dad was released from jail last week. Victoria called to inform me and said that Dad wanted to meet with me to clear the air and start over with a clean slate. I declined the meeting immediately. She asked again if I could help them financially in any way. I told her that 7 years of completely free housing was all the help they were ever getting from me. It's a good thing I didn't wait around or give them the benefit of the doubt, because after Victoria called, I filed a restraining order against my dad. It turned out to be the smartest move I could have made, because 3 days after his release from jail, he showed up at my workplace. He stormed into the reception area screaming about ungrateful children and stolen inheritance, demanding to talk to me man to man to settle this once and for all. My assistant was absolutely terrified by his behavior. Clients were staring in shock, and security was scrambling to respond to the disruption. "Where is he? Where's my son?" he was yelling. "I raised him better than this." My dad was completely unhinged, waving his arms around and pointing at random people like they were conspirators in some grand plot against him. Security called the police while my dad continued his public meltdown. He was yelling about how I had stolen his home and destroyed his life with my selfishness. When the cops arrived to arrest him for violating the restraining order, watching my father get handcuffed in my office lobby was one of the most humiliating experiences of my entire life. Everyone was staring at the spectacle. My phone was ringing with panicked calls from employees, and I had to explain to confused clients why my own dad was being arrested in our building. The restraining order now keeps him 600 feet away from me, all my properties, and my workplace. He's also prohibited from contacting any of my tenants or business associates. I changed my phone number completely and gave all my tenants his photo with strict instructions not to let him near any of my buildings under any circumstances. I also created an LLC for all my real estate holdings, which provides extra legal protection in case my dad tries any future schemes to get at my properties. Some nights I lie awake thinking about everything that's happened over the past few months. The rational part of my brain knows that I did the right thing. I protected my property, enforced reasonable boundaries, held people accountable for their actions, and refused to be manipulated into giving away what I had worked hard to build. The hardest part is explaining the situation to people when it comes up in conversation. When someone asks about my family and I say, "My dad's in jail for breaking into my property," the looks I get are absolutely brutal. It's like I'm some heartless monster who destroyed his own father over money and property disputes. But then I force myself to remember finding my stuff packed in garbage bags, ready to be thrown out so some stranger could have my room. I remember 7 years of paying every single bill while they acted like they owned the place. I remember being locked out of my own house because I wouldn't cave to their unreasonable demands. The guilt fades pretty quickly when I focus on the actual facts instead of getting caught up in the emotions. While my dad was dealing with the legal consequences of his actions, I closed on my 11th property last month. It's a duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood that should double in value over the next 6 years based on the development patterns I've been tracking. Every month when I collect rent and review my portfolio performance, I think about how different things could have been if I had given in to my dad's demands. Where would I be now? Probably fighting for space in my own house while supporting 3 adults who contributed absolutely nothing to the household expenses. The rental income from all my properties combined is more than most people make at their regular full-time jobs. At 26 years old, I have complete financial freedom because I made hard choices and stuck to my boundaries when people tried to cross them. I know that Grandpa Frank would be proud of what I've accomplished. He taught me that property ownership comes with responsibilities, but also with rights that need to be protected. He didn't tolerate people who thought they were entitled to other people's property, and neither do I. When I was cleaning out Grandpa's office after the eviction, something I'd never had the chance to do properly while Dad and Victoria were living there, I found some old documents in a locked drawer. Among them was a letter from Grandpa to his lawyer, written just a few months before he died. In it, Grandpa explained his disappointment in both his sons and why he had planned to leave his estate to me instead of them. The letter mentioned that my dad had borrowed over $120,000 from him over the years and never paid back a single cent. It also revealed that Trevor had actually stolen money from Grandpa's real estate business when he worked there in his 20s. The letter made it crystal clear that Grandpa believed neither of his sons was financially responsible or trustworthy with money or property. Reading that letter made me realize that I had made the right call with both of them. Grandpa had seen their true character long before I did, and his decision to leave everything to me was based on years of observing their behavior and choices. Now my dad is living in some tiny studio apartment across town, working retail at 52 years old, because his credit is completely destroyed, and he has a criminal record that makes it nearly impossible to find decent employment. Victoria moved back to her home state to live with relatives after divorcing him while he was in jail. She actually sent me a message a few months later to let me know about the divorce and to apologize for everything that had happened during this whole ordeal. I blocked her number halfway through reading the conversation. I don't want anything to do with that part of my life anymore. Lily disappeared completely once the free housing opportunity dried up. I have no idea where she ended up, and honestly, I don't care. The whole custody battle story was fabricated from the beginning, so whatever her real situation is, it's not my problem to solve. My real estate empire keeps growing steadily. I'm looking at 3 more properties next month, both with strong rental potential in neighborhoods that are starting to turn around economically. The market conditions are perfect for expansion right now. Trevor tried reaching out to me on social media last month, probably looking for a place to crash now that his creditors have likely tracked him down wherever he disappeared to. I blocked him before he could even finish typing whatever sob story he was planning to send me. I have zero interest in getting involved in his financial mess. Looking back on everything, 7 years of completely free housing wasn't enough for them. Paying every bill, every repair, every tax bill, and every maintenance cost wasn't enough. They wanted to give away my personal space to a woman who was lying about a custody battle. and then tried to lock me out when I refused to go along with their scheme. Every boundary I enforced, every legal document I filed, every hard choice I made, it was all worth it to get where I am now. I have complete independence, financial security, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing nobody can manipulate me into giving away what I've earned through hard work and smart decisions. The friends who called me heartless for standing up to my family, they're still working paycheck to paycheck while I'm building generational wealth that will last for decades. Even some of my closest friends said I should forgive and forget what happened, but none of them offered to house my dad themselves when push came to shove. This holiday season, my girlfriend and I are hosting Thanksgiving at my house. We invited a few close friends who actually supported me through this mess and understood why I had to make the choices I did. It's the first holiday in years that I'm actually looking forward to celebrating. No drama, no unreasonable demands, no unwelcome guests trying to take advantage of my generosity. Just people who respect and genuinely care about each other. So let me ask you this. Guess which one of us just bought his 11th rental property, and which one is working retail with a criminal record? The moral of this story is basically this. Don't mess with people's boundaries. Don't lie about custody cases to gain sympathy. Don't illegally change locks on property you don't own. And definitely don't assume that family relationships give you the right to walk all over someone who's been supporting you for years. Game over. I won.